Dividend policy is another decision that affects various parts of a firm. For instance, the more dividends a firm pays out, the less equity it has to use for capital projects. Consider a firm's equity ratio. We've already learned that this is the amount of equity a firm uses represented as a proportion of its overall capital budget. So we can write this as the equity ratio equals the total amount of equity the firm has divided by its total capital budget. We also know that the amount of equity a firm has to use for capital projects equals its net income minus its dividends paid. So it's the net income it makes for the year on all of its operations, and then they pay out their dividends from that net income. What's left is considered equity. So equity equals net income minus dividends paid. If we substitute this into the equation we just wrote, we can rewrite the equity ratio. So the equity ratio, again, is the total amount of equity. Now we're just substituting in, so it's net income divided by dividends paid over the capital budget. If we solve this equation for the capital budget, we get this equation. Capital budget equals net income minus dividends paid divided by the equity ratio. So, as we can see, the higher the dividends paid, the lower the capital budget. Because the more we take out here from our net income, the higher this number, the smaller the numerator will be, so the smaller the capital budget will be. So let's look at an example. Suppose net income is projected to be $10,000 and the dividend payout ratio is currently 65%. If the firm's debt ratio is currently 25%, what is its projected capital budget? Well, first we need to find the actual dollar amount of dividends that will be paid. The dividends paid is just the net income times the dividend payout ratio. Well, our net income is $10,000. So that goes right here, and the dividend payout ratio is 65%. 65% of $10,000 equals $6,500. So that's a total dollar amount of dividends that goes out to shareholders. Now, using the fact that the equity ratio is 1 minus the debt ratio, or 75%, because the question told us the debt ratio was 25%, we can find the capital budget using that formula that we found in the first part. So the capital budget, again, is equal to the net income minus the dividends paid, or our equity, divided by the equity ratio. Net income is $10,000, dividends paid is $6,500, and the equity ratio is 75%, 0.75. So it's $10,000 minus $6,500 all over 0.75. That gives us a capital budget of $4,667. So without directly affecting its dividend payout rate, a firm can also choose to have a stock split. This is when a firm decides to increase the amount of shares that are outstanding while simultaneously decreasing each share's price so that the total market value is unchanged. Now remember, the total market value of a company's equity is just the price per share times the shares outstanding. And so what we're saying is when a firm decides to split its stock, that total market value, the total value of all of its shares, if you were to go and buy all of the company's shares, it would cost the same amount of money, but you would be paying less per share and you would be buying more shares. A firm will decide to do this, it will decide to have a stock split if the price of its shares is rising. This is because it wants to make its stock seem affordable to small investors. So again, it can change the price per share of its stock without affecting the underlying value of the company. That's the whole idea behind a stock split. The price drop that occurs as a result of the split typically increases demand for the firm's shares. So what that's saying is that when you have a stock split, the number of shares increase, the price will decrease to keep the total market value the same, and that's the price drop that that's referring to. So the price drop is going to happen because of the stock split, but that actually increases the demand for the firm's shares because each share looks cheaper. Also, because a split usually occurs as a result of an increase in price, remember that was the original motivation for the stock split, is that the price was getting too high, they wanted to make it look affordable, investors will feel that the price will continue to increase due to company growth. For these reasons, a stock split is typically a positive signal for the market, and after the initial price reduction, a stock price is expected to rise. So a firm's price per share increases, they have a stock split, because it's getting too expensive for some investors and they want to make themselves look attractive to even the small investors. They have a stock split, the price per share goes down, but that stock split itself sends a positive signal to the market, and so even after that price per share went down, it's going to go up a little bit because of that positive signal, because of investors' expectations of growth. So when a firm decides to have a stock split, it must decide how many shares it will issue for every share that's already outstanding. So, for example, if it decides to issue 2 shares for every share currently outstanding, it will double the number of its shares. This would be referred to as a 2-for-1 stock split. This is the notation we use for a stock split. The first number is how many shares are going out for each of the second number of shares. So in this case, 2 shares are going out for each 1 share that we already have. And you could have any 2 numbers there. So in this case, in the case of a 2-for-1 stock split, the price of each share would be cut in half because we're doubling the total stock of all of the shares outstanding. So the price will be cut in half in order to maintain the total market value of the firm. In general, we can find the number of shares after an X for Y stock split. I'm just leaving these X for X and Y, the numbers general, so we can write a formula with them. So that the number of shares after an X for Y stock split is given by the following equation. The new amount of shares after the split equals the old amount of shares times X divided by Y. So in the original example, it was 2-for-1. So for each 1 share, we now have 2. So this would have been, the 2 would have gone on top for the X, the 1 would have gone on bottom for the Y, so that would have, the ratio would have been 2, so we would have multiplied the number of old shares by 2, which is what we originally said. A 2-for-1 stock split is a doubling of shares, and so the new shares would be twice the amount of old shares. Now we can solve this equation for old shares, and the reason we're doing this is so we can substitute it in just a second. But just note, when we solve this for old shares, we have to divide both sides by X over Y, which is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So this number here, when we've solved for the old amount of shares as a function of the new shares and this stock split factor, this ratio, it's Y over X. So make sure not to get that confused. If you had to plug this number in, you would plug the second number on the top and the first number on the bottom. Since the total value of all the firm's shares outstanding must remain the same after a stock split, we can find the price of a single share after the split. So the new price is equal to the total value, stays the same, divided by the new stock of shares, the new amount of shares outstanding. The total value is the amount of old shares times the old price. That's the total value of our firm, since that's what it was before the split. So the total value equals the amount of old shares we had times the old price. Well, we can substitute the equation from the stock split in for old shares. Remember, we solved that equation for old shares, and we're going to substitute that in right here. That'll give us the total value of the firm's equity equals the total amount of new shares times Y over X, this ratio, times the old price. We're just substituting that in for old shares. Finally, substitute this into the equation for the new price in place of total value. So this whole expression right here equals total value, and we're going to plug it into this equation in the numerator. And when we do that, we get new price equals new shares times Y over X times old price divided by new shares. Well, we have a new shares being multiplied by everything in the numerator and it's the denominator. So after we cancel out new shares from both, this will give us the new price, the price after a stock split, equals Y over X times the old price. So all we need to know is the old price and the actual ratio that the stock split is being split at, that the total amount of all shares are being split at. If we know both those things, we can find what price the share will be after the stock split. So if we know the stock split, again, and we know the old price, we can find the new price directly. Since we know that a stock split is a positive signal to the market, remember that's what we were talking about at the beginning, that because a firm is splitting, it means it's trying to make itself look more attractive. That in and of itself is a positive signal. There may be some further expected growth of the stock's price after it goes down as a result of the split. So if there is, the expected new stock price will be just this new price, so y over x times the old price, but we're going to add this growth term times 1 plus the growth, any expected growth rate based on that positive signal, the fact that it's a positive signal. So the total equation for the expected new price of the stock after a split is this equation right here. So let's look at an example. Suppose the current price of a company's stock is $15 and they decide to have a 3-for-2 stock split. So for every 2 shares currently outstanding, that would be the y in our equation, there are going to be 3 shares issued. That would be the x. So 3 would be x, 2 would be y. If the market is expected to respond to the stock split positively, and the price is expected to grow by 15%, that's talking about after the split, what is the expected new stock price after the split? Well, we have all the information we need from the problem, so we can just use that last equation that we just finished deriving. Remember, the expected new price is y over x times the old price times 1 plus any expected growth. Well, it's a 3-for-2 split, so 2 is y, that goes in the numerator, 3 is x, that goes into the denominator. The old price was $15, the growth rate is 15%, so 1 plus 0.15, that gives us an expected new price of $11.50. And that's the end of part 2.